Welcome back. Tonight, we find ourselves at the edge of an era. The fall of the kingdom. This is a story about what remains when everything we built begins to slip away. It is a story of heavy crowns and broken promises. As we return to Camelot, the air is thick with the scent of coming storms. The fellowship of the Round Table is no more. War has pulled Arthur away to distant shores, chasing a peace that no longer exists, while at home, a new darkness is taking root. Mordred, the shadow of the king's own past, is finally ready to claim the light. Leave the world behind you. We are going back to the beginning of the end. Breathe and surrender to the story. Chapter 1: The Siege of Benwick. Arthur's fleet had crossed the grey waters to Francia, his banners snapping in the salt wind like wounded birds. The king had come to make war upon the man he loved most in this world. Lancelot's castle rose before them, the fortress of Benwick, with its high white walls and narrow windows that watched like sad eyes. 4 weeks now, Arthur's siege engines had hurled stone and fire, catapults groaning like dying giants. But the gates remained closed. The king's tent stretched for miles across the French countryside. A city of canvas and steel, filled with men who did not want to be there. They had come because their king commanded it, because Gawain demanded it, because honor, that cruel master, gave them no choice. Inside those walls, Lancelot would not fight. "I will not raise my sword against my king," he told his men, his voice heavy as stone sinking in deep water. And so he stayed, watching from the battlements as Arthur's army waited below, watching as the weeks turned to months. But Gawain's rage burned hotter than any siege fire. Each dawn, he rode to the castle gates. His armor dented from yesterday's fury, his voice raw from shouting into the wind. "Coward!" he would cry, his words echoing off the white stones. "Murderer! You killed my brother in the dark. Gareth, who loved you like a father. Gaheris, who defended you to the end." His voice would crack then, grief breaking through the anger like water through a dam. "He died calling your name, Lancelot. He died confused, he died not understanding why you cut him down." From the walls above, Lancelot listened, each word a dagger in his heart. His knights urged him to ignore it, to let Gawain tire himself out. But the pain in Gawain's voice was unbearable. Finally, after weeks of this torment, Lancelot could bear it no longer. The gates of Benwick opened slowly, creaking like the door to a tomb. Lancelot rode out alone, his armor plain, his sword sheathed. The morning mist curled around his horse's legs like ghostly fingers. Gawain saw him coming and laughed. A terrible sound, empty of joy. "Finally," he said. "Finally, the great Lancelot finds his courage." They faced each other in the space between the armies, two men who had once been brothers. Around them, thousands watched in silence, holding their breath. "Gawain," Lancelot said softly, I loved Gareth. I loved Gaheris. Their deaths haunt me every night. It was dark, there was chaos and fire. I did not know it was them. You must believe me. I believe nothing from your lips, Gawain replied, his hand on his sword. Draw your weapon, or die unarmed. I care not which. And so they fought. The clash of their swords rang across the field like church bells calling the faithful to prayer. Back and forth they moved, two masters of war, their blades singing a song of sorrow and rage. But Gawain had a secret. An old gift from the sun itself, a blessing that tripled his strength from dawn until noon. As the morning sun climbed higher, Gawain's blows fell harder, faster, until Lancelot was driven back step by step, his arms growing heavy with exhaustion. Do you feel it? Gawain shouted, raining blows down like summer thunder. Do you feel death coming for you at last? Lancelot said nothing. He only defended, blocking and parrying, refusing to strike back with full force. Even now, even as Gawain tried to kill him, he could not bring himself to truly fight his old friend. But then, the sun reached its zenith. Noon passed, and Gawain's supernatural strength began to fade like morning dew under summer heat. His blows came slower, his breathing grew ragged. And Lancelot, who had been waiting, began to press forward. Now it was Gawain who retreated, his legs trembling, his arms burning with fatigue. Lancelot's sword swept in a great arc, and struck Gawain's helmet with a sound like a bell cracking. The helmet split. Gawain fell to his knees, blood streaming down his face. Lancelot stood over him, sword raised for the killing blow. All he had to do was bring it down. End this. End the pain. End Gawain's grief and rage. But he could not. Lancelot lowered his sword and stepped back. I will not kill you, Gawain, he said, his voice breaking. I love you as a brother. Gareth and Gaheris died by accident. By terrible, tragic accident in the darkness and confusion. I would give my own life to bring them back. But I cannot change what happened. I can only ask for your forgiveness. Gawain looked up at him, blood and tears mixing on his face. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been understanding. But then he spoke. I will never forgive you, he whispered. Never. Lancelot nodded slowly, turned, and walked back to his castle. The gates closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid settling into place. The siege continued. Weeks became months, summer turned to autumn. Both armies grew weary, both sides lost men to disease and small skirmishes. But Gawain would not relent, and Arthur was too broken to overrule his nephew's grief. And so they remained, locked in this pointless war, while across the sea, in Britain, darkness was gathering. Chapter 2: The Traitor's Crown. While Arthur besieged Benwick, while the greatest knights of the realm exhausted themselves in a foreign land, Mordred ruled in Camelot. At first, he had been the perfect regent. Fair in judgment, wise in counsel, beloved by the people. But slowly, so slowly that no one noticed until it was too late, he began to change things. He appointed his own men to positions of power. He gathered the ambitious and the resentful to his side with promises of land and gold. He reminded the old families that Arthur had once been a nobody, a boy who pulled a sword from a stone, yes, but still a boy with no royal blood, no noble ancestry. Why should we bow to him? Mordred would say, his voice smooth as honey laced with poison. Why should Britain be ruled by a man who cannot even control his own wife? And the nobles listened. Then came the rumors. Messengers arrived in Britain's towns and villages, speaking in whispers at first, then louder, then shouting in the marketplaces. Arthur is dead, they cried. The king has fallen in Francia. Lancelot has killed him. The people panicked. Mothers clutched their children, merchants hid their goods. Lords locked their castle gates. Without Arthur, who would protect them from the Saxons? From the Picts? From chaos itself? Into this fear, Mordred stepped forward. I am Arthur's son, he announced, his voice ringing through Camelot's great hall. By blood and by right, I claim the throne of Britain. Some protested, but Mordred's men were everywhere, their hands on their swords. And many did not protest at all. They were tired of war, tired of uncertainty. If Mordred could bring peace, did it matter how he came to power? The coronation was held on a gray morning, rain drumming on the roof of the great hall like fingers tapping impatiently. Mordred sat upon Arthur's throne, the same seat where the Pendragon had dispensed justice for 30 years. They placed the crown upon his head. But it was not Arthur's crown, for that was in Francia. This was a new crown, hastily made, too bright and too heavy. It looked wrong. Everything looked wrong. But Mordred was not finished. He summoned Guinevere to the hall, the queen who had been living in quiet seclusion since Lancelot's escape. She came slowly, flanked by guards, her face pale but her spine straight. My lady, Mordred said, smiling like a wolf smiles at a wounded deer. Britain needs a queen as well as a king. I ask for your hand in marriage. The whole fell silent. Guinevere stared at him, shock and horror warring on her face. You are Arthur's son, she whispered. This would be an abomination. Mordred's smile widened. I am a bastard, my lady. Born of incest myself, remember? The rules do not apply to creatures like me. Besides, you need my protection. Or would you prefer I send you back to the stake? Guinevere's hands trembled, but she forced herself to smile. This is sudden, my lord, she said carefully. Give me time. Time to prepare for such an important wedding. A week, perhaps, to make ready? Mordred studied her face, suspicious, but also pleased by her apparent acceptance. 1 week, he agreed, but no longer. That night, Guinevere fled. She took only 2 loyal servants, and in the darkness, they slipped out of Camelot through a hidden passage that Arthur had shown her years ago, when the world was young and full of promise. They rode through the night, the queen's hair streaming behind her like a banner of war. Behind them, torches began to light in Camelot as Mordred discovered her absence. But Guinevere rode faster than pursuit. She reached the Tower of London as dawn broke, that ancient fortress on the Thames, built by Romans long ago. The bishop there gave her sanctuary, for even Mordred dared not violate the protection of the church. So Mordred besieged the tower, surrounding it with soldiers who watched every window, every door. But he could not enter. And Guinevere, trapped inside, sent out a desperate message. She found a young knight still loyal to Arthur, Sir Bedivre's nephew, barely more than a boy. Ride to Francia, she told him, pressing a sealed letter into his hands. Tell Arthur what has happened. Tell him I am sorry for everything. But tell him to come home. The boy rode that same night, stealing past Mordred's guards like a shadow. He reached the coast, found a fisherman willing to brave the autumn storms, and crossed the churning gray sea to Francia. Arthur was in his tent when the messenger arrived, sitting alone, his head in his hands. The Siege of Benwick had accomplished nothing except death and despair. He was beginning to wonder if he would ever see Britain again. The boy stumbled in, soaked with rain and sea spray, and fell to his knees. "My lord," he gasped. "My lord, Mordred has betrayed you." And he told Arthur everything. The king's face went white as parchment. "Mordred," he whispered, "my son, my own son." Gawain, who had been summoned to hear the news, stood frozen in shock. All his rage, all his grief, suddenly it seemed so small, so pointless. While they had been fighting each other, the kingdom had fallen from within. "My lord," Gawain said, his voice breaking, "this is my fault. I pushed you to come here. I insisted we pursue Lancelot. I left Britain undefended because of my pride and my pain. Forgive me." Arthur looked at him, this nephew who had been like a son, whose grief had driven them all to this point. "There is nothing to forgive," Arthur said quietly. We are all guilty here. We have all failed. He stood then, suddenly decisive. Break the siege, he commanded. We sail for Britain immediately. Within the hour, messengers rode to Benwick's gates. A truce was called, and Lancelot emerged to meet with Arthur one final time. They stood facing each other. These two men who had loved the same woman, who had broken each other's hearts. "My lord," Lancelot said, "let me come with you. Let me fight by your side against Mordred. I have wronged you, but Britain is still my home. I can help." For a moment, Arthur's face softened, and he looked as if he might agree. But then he shook his head. "I cannot trust anyone anymore, Lancelot," he said, his voice hollow. "Not even you. Perhaps especially not you. Go back to Francia, live out your days in peace. The age of Camelot is over." Lancelot's face crumpled, but he bowed low. "Then I wish you victory, my king," he whispered, "and I will pray for you every day until I die." Arthur turned away, unable to look at him any longer. And so they parted, for the last time. Chapter 3: The Battle of Dover. Arthur's fleet appeared on the horizon like a flock of great white birds, sails billowing in the autumn wind. From the cliffs of Dover, watchers saw them coming and ran to spread the word. "The king returns," they cried. "Arthur lives." But Mordred had been expecting this. He had gathered an army at Dover, thousands of men drawn from across Britain. Some came because they truly supported him, others because they were paid to fight, and still others because they feared what would happen if they refused. Among Mordred's forces were Saxon warriors, the old enemies of Britain, now fighting alongside the usurper for promises of land and plunder. There were Irish mercenaries, Pictish raiders from the north, even some of Arthur's own former knights who had decided that Mordred's gold was more valuable than loyalty to a distant king. As Arthur's ships approached the shore, Mordred's archers lined the beaches, waiting. The first ships reached shallow water, and the slaughter began. Arrows fell like black rain, hissing into the sea, thudding into shields, finding gaps in armor. Men screamed and fell, some drowning in water barely waist deep, weighed down by their armor. The sea turned red, foam pink with blood. But Arthur's knights pressed forward. They waded through the surf with shields raised, climbed onto the beach through a storm of arrows, and crashed into Mordred's line like a wave of iron and fury. This was civil war. Brother against brother, father against son. Men who had drunk together in Camelot's halls now trying to kill each other on the bloody shingle of Dover Beach. Gawain fought like a man possessed. He was trying to atone, trying to make up for his pride, his stubbornness, his role in bringing them to this place. He cut through Mordred's forces like a scythe through wheat, his sword rising and falling, never stopping. For Arthur, he roared. For Britain. For Camelot. His voice carried over the battlefield, and men rallied to it, fighting harder, pushing forward. But then, a Saxon warrior, massive and battle-scarred, swung his axe in a wide arc. Gawain raised his shield, but the blow was meant for his head. The axe crashed into his helmet, into the same spot where Lancelot's sword had struck weeks before, into the wound that had never fully healed. Gawain's helmet split apart. Blood poured down his face, the old wound torn open, deeper now, far worse. He fell to his knees, the world spinning around him. Men rushed to protect him, dragged him back from the fighting, but Gawain knew. He had fought his last battle. The fighting continued through the day. By evening, Arthur's forces had taken the beach, Mordred's army retreating inland, leaving hundreds of dead behind them. It was a victory, but one that tasted of ashes and blood. Arthur walked the battlefield as the sun set, looking at the faces of the fallen. So many he knew, so many he had knighted himself, had laughed with, had trusted. Now they lay twisted in death, killed by other men he knew, other men he had trusted. "Bring me Gawain," he said quietly. They carried Gawain to the king's tent, and laid him gently on a cot. His face was gray, his breathing shallow and ragged. Blood soaked through the bandages as fast as they could be changed. Arthur knelt beside him, took his nephew's hand. "Gawain," he whispered. "Gawain, I'm here." Gawain's eyes opened. Struggled to focus. "Uncle," he breathed. "My king, forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," Arthur said, tears streaming down his face. "There is everything to forgive," Gawain replied, his voice barely audible. "My pride. My anger. I pushed you to war with Lancelot. I left Britain weak. I let my grief destroy us all." He coughed, blood on his lips. "Gareth would be ashamed of me," he whispered. "He would want us united, not this. Never this. Rest now," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "Save your strength." But Gawain shook his head slightly. "No time," he said. Must write to Lancelot." They brought him parchment and ink, and with trembling hands, Gawain wrote his last words. "Lancelot, my brother, I forgive you. I should have forgiven you long ago. Gareth's death was not your fault. I see that now, too late. Mordred has betrayed us all, has torn Britain apart. Come to Arthur's aid. If you ever loved this land, if you ever loved our king, come now. We need you. Arthur needs you. I will not see you again in this life, but I hope to meet you in the next, as brothers once more. Farewell. He signed his name, and the quill fell from his fingers. Uncle, he whispered, looking up at Arthur. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you, Gawain, Arthur said. You were like my own son. You have always been faithful, always brave. Rest now. Gawain smiled faintly and closed his eyes. His chest rose once more, fell, and did not rise again. Arthur held him for a long time, rocking slightly, as if comforting a sleeping child. Another night gone. Another piece of his heart torn away. The king who had once commanded the finest warriors in the world, now sat alone in a tent, holding the body of his nephew, surrounded by the wreckage of his dream. Outside, the sea whispered against the shore, carrying away the blood, erasing the day's horror as if it had never been. But Arthur would remember. He would remember everything. Chapter 4: The Road to Camlann. After burying Gawain with all honors due a prince of Britain, Arthur turned his army inland. They marched through a land they barely recognized. The villages they passed were burned, fields left unharvested and rotting. The people hid when they saw soldiers coming, no longer sure which side anyone fought for. Civil war had spread like a plague across the countryside, neighbor against neighbor, lord against lord. Arthur sent messengers ahead, calling all loyal knights and lords to gather beneath his banner. Some came. Old men who remembered when Camelot meant something, young idealists who still believed in the king, soldiers who fought because fighting was all they knew. But many did not come. Many had already chosen Mordred, or chosen neutrality, waiting to see who would win before committing themselves. The round table was broken, its fellowship scattered to the winds. Of the original knights, only a handful remained with Arthur. Bedivere was there, the oldest of them all, his beard white as winter snow, but his arm still strong and his loyalty unshakable. Lucan was there, wounded but determined, refusing to leave his king's side. A few younger knights, men who had joined the Round Table in its final years, rode with them as well. But that was all. The greatest fellowship of knights the world had ever seen, reduced to this small, tired band. Mordred, meanwhile, had gathered a vast army. His forces outnumbered Arthur's 3-1, perhaps more. He had promised land to the Saxons, gold to the mercenaries, power to the ambitious nobles. His army was a patchwork of greed and treachery, but it was large. The two forces moved toward each other like storm clouds converging. And on a cold day in late autumn, they met. The place was called Camlann. A broad plain, empty save for grass that whispered in the wind like voices of the dead. The sky overhead was gray as iron, threatening snow or rain, but delivering neither. Just cold, bitter, bone-deep cold. Arthur's army made camp on one side of the plain, Mordred's on the other. That night, cook fires burned like scattered stars, and men tried not to think about tomorrow. In his tent, Arthur could not sleep. He thought of Guinevere, trapped in London. He thought of Lancelot, alone in Francia. He thought of Gawain and Gareth and all the others who had fallen. He thought of Mordred, his son. The boy he had tried to love, the young man he had raised and trained and trusted. How had it come to this? Merlin had warned him long ago. The child born of your sin will be your doom, the wizard had said. Arthur had tried to prevent it, tried to change fate, but fate, it seemed, could not be changed. As dawn approached, a messenger came to Arthur's tent. "My lord," the man said, "Mordred requests a parley. He wishes to meet you, between the armies, to discuss terms." Arthur looked at Bedivere, who stood nearby. "It could be a trap," Bedivere said quietly. "It could be," Arthur agreed. "But if there is any chance at all to avoid this battle, I must take it." And so it was arranged. At midday, Arthur rode out into the space between the armies. He brought only a small escort, Bedivere and Lucan, and a handful of knights. From the other side, Mordred approached with his own guard. The two groups met in the center of Camlann Plain. Arthur and Mordred dismounted, walked toward each other until only a few paces separated them. They looked at each other, father and son, king and usurper. Mordred was handsome, Arthur noticed. He had his mother's dark beauty, her sharp intelligence. But his eyes were cold, so cold. "Mordred," Arthur said softly, "why? Why?" Mordred laughed, the sound bitter as winter wind. "You ask me why, father? You, who hid me all my life, who treated me as a secret, a shame? I am your son. I have every right to rule after you. But you would never have acknowledged me, would you? I would have lived and died as Mordred, the loyal knight, never as Mordred, the king's heir." Arthur flinched. "I was going to tell the truth," he said. "In time, I was going to acknowledge you. Lies, Mordred spat. You were ashamed of me, of the circumstances of my birth. You lay with your own sister, father, unknowing, perhaps, but you still did it. And I am the living proof of your sin. Yes, Arthur said quietly, you are. And that is my burden to bear, not yours. You are not responsible for how you came into this world, Mordred. You are only responsible for what you do with the life you have been given. They stood in silence for a moment. It doesn't have to be this way, Arthur continued. We can end this now. I will publicly acknowledge you as my son. You will be my heir, recognized by all of Britain. But you must lay down your arms, disband your army, and wait until my time has passed naturally. Mordred's expression flickered. For just a moment, Arthur saw uncertainty there, saw the young man who might have chosen differently. You truly mean it? Mordred asked. You would name me heir? I do, Arthur said. I swear it, by Excalibur, by my crown, by everything I hold sacred. Let us end this madness. Let us heal Britain together. Mordred looked away, across the plain, at his army, at the future he had imagined. Let me consider it, he said finally. Give me until tomorrow at dawn. Arthur nodded. Tomorrow at dawn, then. We will meet here again, and you will give me your answer. But fate had other plans. As the two leaders turned to return to their armies, as hope flickered faintly in Arthur's heart for the first time in months, something moved in the grass. An adder. A small serpent, disturbed by the trampling of so many horses, slithered through the grass near one of Arthur's young knights. The knight, nervous and alert, felt something brush his ankle. He looked down, saw the snake, and without thinking, drew his sword to strike it. The blade flashed in the gray light. And 10,000 men saw that flash. Treachery, someone shouted from Mordred's army. They are attacking, another voice cried from Arthur's side. No, Arthur shouted, wheeling his horse around. No, wait. It was just. But his voice was drowned out by the sound of war horns. Drums began to beat, a rhythm like the heartbeat of death itself. Battle cries erupted from both armies. And like two avalanches released from opposite mountains, the armies charged. Arthur looked at Mordred one last time. Their eyes met across the narrowing distance, and both men knew. There would be no tomorrow's dawn. No second chance. No peace. Arthur drew Excalibur, the sword blazing with light even under the gray sky. "For Britain," he cried. And the armies crashed together like the sea against cliffs in a storm. Chapter 5: The Battle of Camlann. The Battle of Camlann was like nothing Britain had ever seen. It was not a battle between nations, not a clash of armies defending their homes. It was a family destroying itself. A kingdom committing suicide. Fathers fought sons. Brothers killed brothers. Men who had sat together at the round table, who had quested together, laughed together, bled together, now they carved each other apart with savage efficiency. The plain of Camlann became a sea of churning violence. Swords rose and fell like a terrible harvest. Horses screamed, men screamed, the wounded called for help that would not come because everyone who might have helped them was fighting for their own lives. Blood soaked into the earth until the ground became mud, red and slick and treacherous. Bodies piled upon bodies, the living climbing over the dead to reach new enemies to kill. Arthur fought as he had not fought in years. Excalibur sang in his hand, a song of light and death. The sword cut through armor like cloth, shattered shields like rotted wood. Wherever the king went, men fell before him. Mordred's soldiers breaking and fleeing from the terrible figure in blood-stained armor wielding a sword that seemed made of captured sunlight. But Arthur was not the young champion who had pulled this sword from the stone. He was old now, his arms growing heavy, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Each swing of Excalibur cost him more than the last. Bedivere stayed close to the king, the old knight fighting with a lifetime's skill, protecting Arthur's back as he had for decades. And Lucan, despite his wounds from Dover, refused to leave, fighting on through pain and exhaustion. One by one, the other knights fell. The young men who had joined the Round Table in its final years, their names not yet famous, their deeds not yet legendary, they died in the mud of Camlann, and their names were lost to history. The battle raged from noon to dusk. As the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of blood and fire, the fighting slowly died down. Not because victory had been won, but because there were so few left alive to fight. Thousands had started the day. Perhaps 100 remained standing. The plain fell silent except for the moaning of the dying. Arthur stood amidst a field of corpses, leaning on Excalibur to keep himself upright. Bedivere was beside him, wounded but alive. Lucan, poor Lucan had fallen, his wounds finally too much to bear. The king looked around at the carnage, at the destruction of everything he had built. "Is this my legacy?" he whispered. "Death and ruin?" "No, my lord," Bedivere said quietly. "Your legacy is the dream that men can be better. That dream survives, even if we do not." Then, across the twilight battlefield, Arthur saw him. Mordred. Standing atop a pile of the fallen, his armor dented and blood-stained, but still on his feet. Around him, a handful of his men remained, but only a handful. Father and son looked at each other across the field of the dead. And Arthur knew what he had to do. "Bedivere," he said, "stay here." "My lord," Bedivere began. "Stay here," Arthur repeated gently. "This is something I must do alone." He began to walk across the battlefield, his feet slipping in blood and mud, his body aching with exhaustion. Excalibur dragged in his hand, too heavy now to lift. Mordred watched him come. The usurper's face was unreadable, some mixture of triumph and regret, victory and loss. He, too, walked forward to meet his father. They met in the center of Camlann, the same place where, hours before, they had almost made peace. "It didn't have to be this way," Arthur said, his voice hoarse from shouting battle commands all day. "Perhaps not," Mordred replied, "but this is the way it is." They stood facing each other, breathing hard, swaying with fatigue. Two men who might have loved each other, if the world had been different. If Arthur had not sinned, if Mordred had not been born of that sin, if secrets had not festered into poison. "I'm sorry," Arthur whispered. "I'm sorry for all of it." Mordred's face softened for just a moment. "So am I," he said. Then he raised his sword. And Arthur raised Excalibur. The final duel began. They were both exhausted, both wounded, both barely able to stand. Their swords met slowly, almost gently, as if the blades themselves were reluctant to continue this tragedy. But continue it they did. Mordred struck high. Arthur blocked. Arthur thrust forward. Mordred parried. Back and forth they moved in the gathering darkness, two shadows fighting over the corpse of a dream. Then Arthur saw an opening. Mordred's guard dropped for just a moment, and Arthur, calling on the last of his strength, drove Excalibur forward with all his might. The sacred sword pierced Mordred's armor, pierced his body, ran him through. Mordred gasped, looked down at the blade protruding from his chest. But he did not fall. With his dying strength, with hate and love and regret all mixed together in his final act, Mordred grabbed the blade of Excalibur with his bare hands. He pulled himself forward along the sword, closer to Arthur, the blade sliding deeper through his own body. And with his last breath, he raised his own sword and brought it down upon his father's head. Arthur's helmet crumpled. The king fell to his knees, still holding Excalibur, which was still embedded in Mordred's body. Mordred collapsed, sliding off the blade, falling into the mud. He looked up at Arthur, blood bubbling from his lips. "Father," he whispered, and died. Arthur knelt in the mud, holding his son's body. Blood ran down his face from the wound in his head, mixing with his tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the corpse. "I'm so sorry, my son." In the distance, Bedivere called out, "My lord! My lord!" But Arthur could barely hear him. The world was growing dark, darker than the falling night. He tried to stand, managed to get to his feet, took one step, then another. Bedivere ran to him, caught him as he stumbled. "Arthur," the old knight wept. "Oh, Arthur." "It's done," Arthur whispered. "It's finally done." His eyes closed, and darkness took him. The longest night. The Battle of Camlann was over. The field lay silent under the stars, a monument to the end of an age. Thousands had died. The greatest knights of Britain, gone. The fellowship of the Round Table, destroyed. Father and son, both fallen. Bedivere, the last knight standing, looked out over the carnage and wept. But Arthur still lived, barely. His breath came shallow and ragged, his wound bleeding freely. "Bedivere," he whispered. "Bedivere, take me away from here." And so the old knight lifted his king, carried him from that terrible place, away from the dead, away from the ruin of Camelot. Where they went, what happened next? That is a tale for our final episode. Tonight, we have witnessed the fall of a kingdom. We have seen how pride and pain and old wounds can destroy even the greatest dreams. We have watched fathers and sons, friends and brothers, tear each other apart. It is the darkest chapter of Arthur's tale. But remember, even in the darkest night, stars still shine. Even in the deepest sorrow, there is beauty. Even in endings, there are new beginnings. In our next and final episode, we will journey with Arthur to the very end. We will see Excalibur return to the waters. We will travel to the mystical Isle of Avalon. And we will discover that some legends never truly die. For now, rest. Let the story settle into your dreams like snow falling on ancient stones. Breathe deeply. And know that tomorrow, there will be one more tale to tell. The darkest hour comes just before dawn. Sleep now, and dream of Camelot.